Apple Log on iPhone is worth celebrating. It will be the reason iPhone footage no longer looks like it was shot with a phone. Apple Log is not a filter that washes out your image only for you to later put effort in to restore it. That would be absurd. This is a proper log profile with full documentation, there's an official white paper for it, and the image you get when using it is completely different compared to without. This is Apple giving users an unprecedented way to get a faithfully organic image out of our iPhones, to bypass much of the processing which, to its credit, has done so much work for us, but it's now giving us the keys to do with the image as we wish. The moment you flip on that toggle which says ProRes Log, the image starts getting treated in a completely different way. The most notable difference is how there's no local tone mapping when you shoot in log. Local tone mapping refers to selectively brightening or darkening certain portions of the image. In conventional video mode, your iPhone will do this even if you've locked your exposure. You can see how when I introduce a bright element to the image, it gently darkens that area so it doesn't blow out. When shooting in log mode, this does not happen. It's this lack of processing which gives you a particularly noticeable advantage when using controlled lighting. An example would be right now, I'm being lit with studio lights and this is all being filmed on my iPhone 15 Pro Max in Apple Log. Compared to conventional video mode, the big takeaway here is how Apple Log preserves the intended lighting ratios so you don't lose that contrast which you were trying to achieve through lighting. But tone mapping really isn't a bad thing. Most of the time it works wonders without us even noticing. In fact, for day-to-day shooting, it's the only way really to cram a contrasty scene into a frame of normal looking video. Ironically, when we work with log video in post, we sometimes would also take the footage through a similar process of selectively brightening and darkening regions to preserve detail. The difference then in doing this manually is consistency. Nothing changes unless you instruct it to do so. This translates to the absence of exposure fluctuations if you were to do jump cuts, and any blanket adjustments do not get derailed as a result of local tone mapping. There's also more room for the filmmaker to apply creative intent. Take this scene here for example. I shot this in Apple Log and also a version without, so let's call that conventional mode. In conventional mode, the goal of the iPhone's image processing is to preserve as much detail as possible, so both this tree and the bright sky backlighting it are preserved. In the log version, you can see when I interpret this as Rec. 709, the tree in the foreground is more or less a silhouette. This is actually a more true-to-life representation of the actual scene's contrast. And now it's up to me if I want to keep it this way, or bring up the details in the tree and roll off the highlights, or apply local adjustments so they're both preserved. I've shot a few more comparisons between conventional mode and Apple Log on my iPhone 15 Pro Max, and simply restoring the log footage to Rec. 709 already reveals how natural iPhone footage can actually look. Apple Log has the same color primaries as Rec. 2020, so it gives us a pretty wide gamut to work with. It's genuinely challenging now to tell if this was shot on a phone because it no longer has the telltale characteristics of phone footage. When you do go ahead with local adjustments and grading, it only makes sense that the hand-processed log footage looks more finessed compared to the imaging engine's real-time adjustments made at time of capture. For daily life, we can all thank our iPhone's processing for the ready-to-eat footage the moment we stop recording, but the log approach is to hold off on all this processing and have a human spend hours deciding exactly how each frame should look. The very concept of shooting log is quite a technical subject matter in itself, yet the gist of shooting on an iPhone is how little one has to worry about technicals. So each to their own, there are actually two ways you can approach shooting log on iPhone. There's the alternative experience of using standalone pro camera apps like the Blackmagic Camera app to have absolute control over shooting parameters. The default experience is the stock camera app, which is as simple as pointing the camera and hitting record. It's really the most effortless way I've ever shot in log before, but the simple beauty of it is how it's just a toggle away in the camera app when you decide a moment is worthy of capturing in log. It is weird to just trust the camera to expose your log footage, because on cinema cameras you tend to be very careful with log exposure, but on iPhone, it's designed to be okay this way. The default camera app will allow us to shoot log only in ProRes 422HQ up to 30p. If you record onto external media, it unlocks the option to do 60p. With the Blackmagic camera app, this limit is actually bypassed because it lets you do 60p internally. But the reason this isn't made available in the original app is simply because of the massive file sizes that come with 4K 60p ProRes HQ footage. That being said, the Blackmagic camera app does give you extra flexibility for shooting in Apple log, because not only do you get to choose your flavor of ProRes, you can also opt to shoot your log footage in HEVC. Notably though, the 2x camera is not directly selectable in the Blackmagic app, and going between focal lengths remains a distinct advantage in the stock app, because it allows you to smoothly transition between cameras even when shooting in ProRes log. The log profile itself also has a few interesting characteristics worth talking about. If you shoot Rec 709 and Apple log with the exact same exposure settings, you'll see the overall brightness levels are much lower in log. This way, the image demands more light when exposing and is usually done in favor of preserving detail in the shadows. 18% gray is mapped to 49 IRE, that's on the high side. Black levels are set at 15 IRE, but the point at which your highlights begin to clip varies depending on your ISO. When I tested it on the main camera, my highlights clipped at 80 IRE on the lowest ISO of 55. It stayed there till I passed ISO 470, at which my clipping point began gradually shifting upwards until it reached the ceiling at around ISO 2030. Interestingly, throughout all this, the black levels remained constant. The same trend was observed on the ultra-wide and tele cameras, but the ceiling rays occurred at different thresholds. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't typically keep an eye on my ISO and clipping points when shooting casually on iPhone, so to package that information into actual things to keep in mind, if you're shooting out when it's very bright, you don't really have the most leeway in the highlights, but you do get very clean shadows. That's why if it's bright and sunny, expose for the highlights. But if you're in low light, try to get your shadows accounted for so you don't have to pull them up in post, because it will get noisy. Looking at the noise pattern in low-light Apple log footage, it does seem that some amount of noise reduction has still made its way through, but at least the look of it is this monochromatic grain, which really looks a lot more pleasing compared to the blocky fuzzy artifacts when not shooting in log. The sharpening has also really been toned down in Apple log. At a glance, it looks softer in comparison to conventional iPhone footage, but it's actually less destructive on details. This of course gives you the freedom to sharpen the footage to your liking in post, but I personally actually prefer this less edgy look. Now, I risk getting roasted for saying this, but it's almost as if it's got more of a film-like quality to it. But what's not up for debate is how well supported Apple log is. It is rather incredible that this is a smartphone with official ASUS compatibility. In the latest version of DaVinci Resolve, including the iPad version, you'll find the IDT for Apple log already present in the list of inputs. In Final Cut Pro, the LUT for Apple log is also built right into the software. There are also official LUTs released to conform Apple log into Rec 709 or linear video. Those are made available through the Apple developer website. I myself like to load the Rec 709 LUT into the Blackmagic camera app so I can monitor in Rec 709 when shooting in Apple log. For anyone who's a filmmaker, the iPhone 15 Pro and Pro Max are the best companion phones to be carrying in your pockets right now. It's probably not the first time we've snuck iPhone footage into a rather serious project, but now with Apple log, it feels so much more legitimate doing that. It is a bit surreal to be taking a phone camera this seriously, but when it invites you to do so, then delivers on its promise, suppose the least we could do is roll with it.